Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari and we start the original Shannara trilogy. And if you're wondering why I am doing this around Trilogy, it's because this book is book 0. So there's 4 books in the original Shannara trilogy. The first 3 books were the first Shannara books that Terry Brooks wrote. You have the Sword of Shannara, the Elf Stones of Shannara, and the Wish Song of Shannara, I think. I could turn around and look, but I'm just gonna pretend like I know what I'm talking about. The Sword of Shannara was published in 1977 and this was published in 1996. So there's your difference. So this was the first of the prequels, if that makes sense. I know I've been reading like the Shannara books for the past 3 months, right? So there are already 8 prequels that I read before this prequel. But this was a more direct prequel to the Sword of Shannara. This takes place using characters that you see in the Sword of Shannara and then this original trilogy, while the previous prequels have to do with like our modern day world and the fall of mankind. By the time you get to this novel, there's no like knowledge that there's any connection between this Tolkien-like fantasy universe and the Pacific Northwest, where the previous books mostly take place. So, this is hundreds of years. There's no exact timeline, or there might be, but I don't know it. But there's no exact timeline. This has happened like a long time after the previous books, which makes like the Bearers of the Black Staff like duology that I just read, that this makes that even more pointless than I thought when I had read it. And I hate it even more so. So skip over that duology. Just saying, just save yourself the headache and skip that one entirely. Anyway, getting back to this one, this book is the only book in the extended Shannara universe that has a character with the name Shannara in it. And this follows the creation of the Sword of Shannara, the king that the sword belonged to, which is Gerald Shannara, and like the events around Gerald's coronation, why the sword was created, a bunch of stuff like that. Now, I have to say that this might be a personal problem, but this book fucked with my understanding of the Shannara timeline, right? I knew a lot of the things that happened in this book, but I did not think that the timeline on all of these things, like, happened when it did.
Hi, interesting myself here. I'm going to cut all of this part about me saying that the timeline doesn't make any sense, because that was me misremembering, and everything that I was complaining about is mentioned in the next book. So there's no point in me complaining about it or you having to hear me complain about it.
Let's just start first with the basic plot of this book. At the beginning of this book, a druid called Bremen goes to the Shadehorn, which is like a dead lake where the dead souls of former druids live, and they'll give prophecies to druids. Doesn't make sense. Anyway, give prophecies to druids and then help them like prevent bad shit from happening, right? So Bremen goes to the Shadehorn and gets 4 visions. So these visions are a fortress in a mountain where the Black Elf Stone resides. Then another vision is a man defeating the Warlock Lord with a sword. Warlock Lord is a former druid who, during the first war of the races, basically almost destroyed humanity as a whole. Like, all of the races, dwarfs, gnomes, trolls, humans, elves, were all at war with each other, and at the end of the War of the Races, the races all went their separate ways. Then the next vision is Bremen on the shores of the Shadehorn with a young man that he's never seen before. And then the fourth is the fall of the Druid Keep and the death of all the druids, right? And he is told one of these things have already come to pass, right? So you're basically following like all of these different points of the story, and like how they mesh up. So the location to the Black Elf Stone is pretty straightforward. They just have to find this place and then retrieve the Black Elf Stone. And then the fall of the Druid Keep is very straightforward. Like, all the druids are gonna die. What more do you need? The man holding the sword, Bremen knows that he has to craft this sword. So you've got like this adventure where he's traveling with these people and trying to figure out like getting all the pieces together and all of the different things to craft the sword, which is the Sword of Shannara. And then the last one is Bremen's like druid apprentice, right? Which is a very, very minor part of this story, but is very important for future stories. There is a character in this book called Marith, and she is like a druid trainee with like innate magical abilities, and like no one has innate magical abilities in this world. Like, that is so rare as to basically be non-existent. So Marith has innate magical abilities, and there is a TV show called, there's a Shannara TV show that exists, right? And there is a character named Marith who has innate magical abilities. They just took the Marith character from this book and like plopped her into that universe, and that was throwing me really off because, spoilers for the television show, Marith is Alanon's daughter in the television show. And Alanon is a 12-year-old boy in this book, and Marith is a grown woman. So it's literally impossible for Marith to be Alanon's daughter, and she is not Alanon's daughter at all. Marith thinks she's Bremen's daughter, but she ends up probably being the daughter of like one of the Warlock Lord's minions. Like, corrupt, like the Warlock Lord had other druids follow him, and she's the daughter of one of those corrupted druids. We assume. Like, it's not ever really like 100% confirmed. She could be the daughter of the Warlock Lord for all we know, but she is the cursed daughter of a bad guy. So having watched that television show and knowing the character just before I read this book, that was all throwing me off, because I was like, I know this name Marith, but I swear she was Alanon's daughter. Is this a different character? Am I confused? I actually had to go online and look it up because I was really that confused about it. But yeah, so the television show does like take like bits and pieces out of different Shannara stories and then like condenses and changes and condenses the characters to do things that they didn't actually do in the books. So overall, I think that I actually enjoyed this book for the most part, but I was just so thrown off and confused by like misjudging the timeline so badly that I couldn't say I loved it. So I gave it a 3 stars. I think that covers it for this one, and I'll see you in a few seconds for you for a clip of the Sword of Shannara. Hello, if you are here to see me suffer, you have come to the right place. But before I start bitching for the next, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, I want to say that everything that I said about the timelines not making sense in the last story, all of that is in the Sword of Shannara. And I don't know, I guess it's just been, because it's been 20 something years since I've read the Sword of Shannara, I misremembered things. And all of the weird timelines were discussed in the Sword of Shannara and apparently made perfect sense. I am just an idiot. Moving on to this chunker of an absolute asshole book. This is budget Lord of the Rings, and I hate Lord of the Rings. Do you even understand how much suffering I did reading all 700 plus pages of this? Because it's budget Lord of the Rings. I'm starting to think that I like one book in the Shannara series, and my love for that one book has just carried everything else throughout my lifetime, and I don't actually like this series. But we will read on and determine that better moving forward. Anyway, suffering aside, I'm going to run through this in kind of an order. First, the synopsis of what this is about, then I'm going to go through the breakdowns of how it's exactly like Lord of the Rings, and then like other issues that I had with the story. I'm also going to put this down because this is really heavy, so I'll put a cover up here. Anyway, this follows only living descendant remaining of Gerald Shannara. This takes place about 500 years after the events of the first king of Shannara, which is the book that I was just talking about a second ago. And the Warlock Lord is back because Gerald Shannara failed to use the sword appropriately and kill the Warlock Lord. But basically Alanon shows up, recruits Shay to like go find the Sword of Shannara, gives him the Elf Stones. Shay's brother Flick comes with him, and they recruit another friend who is the Prince of Lay, and then they go to Colhaven, which is the Dwarven city, where they meet up with Balinor, who is the king of he's the prince, he's the son of the king, so the prince of Colhaven, and a dwarf and 2 elves, right? And then they set off for Paranor to get the sword, because that's where the sword's been this whole time, but the Warlock Lord has already sent gnomes to infiltrate Paranor, and they are like just keeping the sword there. Because the Warlock Lord obviously doesn't want to be around the sword, so he has no need to like take it out of Paranor and bring it to the Skull Kingdom where the Warlock Lord lives. Yes, it's called the Skull Kingdom. Not super exciting. And then shit happens through all of this, and then there's little mini adventures along the way, and then the band gets split up and the band comes back together, and they get split up and they come back together and they meet new people and blah 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 blah, and then everybody wins in the end, and Shay defeats the Warlock Lord, and they live happily ever after, at least until the next book. So I hope that breaks down about 700 pages. So let's move into why this is Lord of the Rings. I actually took notes on this every time. Okay, first off, I need to reiterate, I hate Lord of the Rings. So my knowledge of Lord of the Rings is not like immaculate. Like, I know the basic story, I've seen all the movies, I've read portions of the books, like I have a general idea of what happens. There are things that happen in Shannara that may not act, or that may actually happen in Lord of the Rings, and I just don't remember them because I hate Lord of the Rings. These are the things that I remember happening in Lord of the Rings, which is saying a lot because I hate Lord of the Rings. Capiche? Great. So, first off, we have, actually there's a picture. This book has pictures. just an extra bonus. So we have the gang. So you have Shay and Flick, who are the hobbits. I mean, they're the Veilmen. Shay is basically Frodo. Like, straight up 100% Frodo. He is part of this group because he is the chosen one, not because he has any ability at all to be a warrior or save the kingdom, right? He's just, it's his destiny, and because of his blood, whatever. His brother Flick is Samwise, like, there you go. Then back over here we have Alanon, who is Gandalf. He's a druid, all-powerful mystic, very mysterious, very long-lived, no one really knows what he's doing, he's kind of all-powerful, blah, 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 blah. We have a dwarf and the two elves who don't really have like any one-for-one comparisons to Lord of the Rings, so that's fine. Back here you have, oh god, I just said his name like a second ago, and now I can't remember it. Gulliver? Is that it? I don't know. But he is the son of a king, and he's a human. And then Minion, or Minnon, I'm gonna call him Minion because that's how I do it in my head, but I really don't think that's his actual name. He is the Prince of Lay, so he's also the son of a king. He is kind of a mix between Bromar and Legolas, right? Because he is like the best bowman of all time. And then he is... what is that guy's name from... See, this is the problem with Lord of the Rings, is I'm bad with names to begin with, but he's the cute guy who... Aragon? No, that's Aragorn? I know you guys are laughing at me watching this, but yeah, he's that guy, because he's like the son of a king who becomes the king like midway through the book, right? All-powerful human leader, like the greatest human leader there is, blah 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 blah. No one cares. So that is just instant parallels right there. So the first few things outside of that I'm going to say are like very vague references, but then it gets like more detailed and more exact, like they just, or exact, Terry Brooks just straight up stole this here in a second. There is actually a scene where Shay wakes up in a bed in an all-white room after fainting, and I swear that happens in The Lord of the Rings with Bilbo, Frodo. This is a struggle, guys. At one point, they travel through a mountain fortress that has been locked off for thousands of years, or 1,000 years, or hundreds of years, I don't know, but because of the danger. And it's like this magical fortress that they have to travel through because they can't get through the mountain passes. And this is like, it's straight up from Lord of the Rings. There's even a lake where a tentacle monster comes out of the lake. Like, in this book, the lake is inside the magical fortress instead of right outside, but it's the same fucking story. At one point, Alanon, the wise old Gandalf character, literally falls into a fiery pit while screaming for the rest of them to run away. Like, come on. There is also a fortress city built on a plateau that is the last bastion of mankind and has to be defended against the army of the Warlock Lords to protect the rest of the races. I mean, it's budget Lord of the Rings, guys. Balinar's brother and father are enthralled by a mystic who subverts their brains and basically has them where they're going to just give the city up to the Warlock Lord. So this mystic advisor takes all the power and he's evil. Like, it's budget Lord of the Rings. Okay, that's all of the ones that I wrote down. Yeah. As far as like just general problems with the book itself, it's very repetitive. Terry Brooks will say a line, and then like 2 or 3 pages later, he will say the exact same line, word for word. It's like, Flick needs to make it, or Shay needs to make it out of this forest. And then 2 pages later, Shay needs to make it out of this forest. And then 2 pages later, Shay is worried he's not going to make it out of this forest. It's just very, very repetitive, which is so unnecessary because the thing's already 700 fucking pages long. It would probably like be a third shorter if you took out all the repetitiveness. He also adds a bunch of like useless facts that add like unnecessary length to the book. Like, it'll be raining, for example, and he'll say something like, Flick is going through the rain, or the rain's hiding Flick, or whatever, it doesn't matter, and then it'll say this rain will last for the next 3 days. But you're in the moment following Flick, like walking through this camp. Like, we don't need to know that the rain's going to last for the next 3 days because that has fuck all to do with anything at all. And the final thing that really bothered me was Terry Brooks' overuse of like the word man, as in like manhood, mankind, or just man, where there are 5 distinct races in this universe. You have the race of man, you have elves, trolls, dwarfs, and gnomes. And even though he might not necessarily be referring to the race of man, he will use the word man for all of the races, which is unnecessarily confusing. So he'll be talking about like the elves, and he'll talk about like all of mankind, but he's specifically referencing the elves who are not men, like say like all of elvenkind or humankind, or he'll talk about the trolls coming to manhood. Like, why the fuck would you just not say adulthood? And it's one of those things where it's like, having read the prequel books that weren't published when this book was published, like in 2021, like, I know that the dwarfs, trolls, gnomes are all like man. They're all human that have been like changed because of the shit that happened in the Great War, which was 2,000 years before this book happens, if that helps. Like our human current timeline back in 1996 was 2,000 years before the advent of this book. So like, I know that the dwarfs, trolls, and gnomes are all humans, they're all man, but in 1977 no one knew that, and it's unnecessarily confusing, and especially when it applies to elves, because elves are not men. Elves are an entirely different species and race. So that's just, it's unnecessary and stupid, and I hate it. Just like I hate everything about this book. So that's going to be my complaining for today. I'm sorry that was a little bit long. That was about 15 minutes of me complaining, but it was a 700-page book, so just deal with it. All right, Elfstones of Shannara. let's start with what this is about. So this follows Will Omsford, who is the grandson of Shay Omsford. He's his son in the television show, but he's his grandson in the book. Anyway. And a young elven girl named Amberly Essedel, who is the granddaughter of the king of the elves. They go on a quest because the Elcrease is dying. And the Elcrease is a tree that basically creates a pocket of like timelessness, like a pocket dimension, I guess is the best way to put that, where all of the fairy demons are trapped. So these are demons that existed in the time of like the fairy creatures before humankind. So this has to be like at least 10,000 years before our existence, and then probably a good 2,000 to 3,000 years plus that. So the Elcrease is dying. The only way for her to be saved is a elven girl has to take the seed of the Elcrease to the blood fire and then kind of like anoint the seed, or I guess anoint works, but you have to put the seed in the blood fire and that will enable the seed to become the new Elcrease. And so you got like Will and Amberly trying to get the seed to the blood fire, and then you have Alanon and Ander Essedel, who is the son of the king. He's not, I don't want to say he's not a important character, like the king is still alive and he's still part of that. It's just Ander is the perspective that we're reading from. So they're all like in a major like war fighting the demons, right? So the part of the book that follows like Amberly and Will, I very, very much enjoy. And the part that's all like major battles, I'm bored with. Apparently I had a lot more patience for major battle scenes in my youth that I just don't anymore these days. So from that general synopsis, where I want to go with this is I gave this 5 stars. So is it really worth 5 stars? Probably not. This has a lot of nostalgia for me because this is the very first fantasy I ever read, or very first adult fantasy I ever read. But I'd still give it a 4-star if I read it today. So it's obviously considerably better than all of the other Shannara books that I've been reading, but what makes it better? And I think there's a couple of things. One of the things is this is really Terry Brooks' first like really original story, at least in the chronological order that I've been rereading them as. With all of like the prequel books, he's like cannibalizing his own work and retelling stories that he had already told. And then the Sword of Shannara, he just knocked off Tolkien. So this is like his first real chance to shine, to tell his own story, to make something unique. And this is very unique. This is very, very good book. The other thing that I think makes me love this is the powerful female characters. You have Amberly, who is very powerful and strong, but not in a way that you normally see. She's not like a badass, like, I'm gonna kick your ass, I'm not like other girls kind of girl. She's like, she's terrified. All she wants to do is like teach children and take care of the earth. Like, that's her entire goal in life, is she wants to teach children to take care of the earth and then just be a gardener, basically. And she is called on to do this very, very scary thing, this very scary adventure, and she's confused and she's frightened, but she still does it. I think Terry Brooks does a very good job of displaying that kind of strength, where you can still be frightened and uncomfortable and not want to do something, but do it because you know it needs to be done. The other female character that I really like in here, I mean, you've got the Elcrees too, so she's kind of a cool character, very strong. I mean, she's the protector of the elven people. But you also have Atreya, who is a rover girl. Now, I'm going to say straight up that the idea of the rovers is very racist against Roma peoples. They are a traveling band of like traders and like horse trainers, basically. And they're known for like being thieves and fortune tellers and stealing children. Like, you see where the racist stereotypes come in there. But that aside, Atreya is grown up in a society where women are just completely without value. The rovers in this book are a very male-dominated society. Horses are worth more than women to them. Like, a woman exists, or a wife exists to care for you, to cook for you, to do all the shit that you don't want to do, and a daughter exists to sell to another man once she's old enough to bear children. So Atreya is a very strong, like, kick-ass bitch of a woman in a very male-dominated society. And she is very confident in herself, knows exactly what she wants, and just accepts that she's going to get what she wants because she fucking deserves it. There's a tab, or a couple tabs in here, of just examples of why I love Atreya so much. So I guess before I get into what's in the tabs, I should mention something. This book has a love V, but it's not like other love Vs. This is 2 girls and 1 guy, because usually you've got like the main girl character and there's 2 men, her best friend, and then this mysterious other man who she can't decide which one is more important to her, which one she's in love with. This one, Will's the V part, and then he's got Amberly and Atreya. So, and both women care for him, and he cares for both women for completely different reasons. And I want to say that I'm not a big fan of like the women competing against each other trope, where 2 women are going to be like really bitchy and hate each other and fight over a man. Not my thing. That doesn't happen in this book. Both of these women are completely supportive and respectful of each other, at least as far as like Will goes. Like, Amberly is a bit racist against the rovers, and then Atreya doesn't have the patience for Amberly being soft or whatever, like kind. Like, Atreya's like, stop sniveling, you'll survive. So Atreya's just a lot tougher, but they grudgingly respect each other, and neither one of them like even slightly fight over Will between the 2 of them. This also passes the Bechdel test, where 2 women talk to each other about something other than a man. Important thing to note, that they do talk to each other about something other than Will. So when Will and Amberly first come across the rovers, Atreya, at least to me, seems to fall in love with Will pretty quickly, but I think she's fallen in love with the concept of Will. She has been in a very misogynistic society her entire life, and to meet somebody like Will, who is a healer, he's caring, he's not sexist, he treats women as his equals, this might have been the only time that Atreya has ever seen a man like this. And then he's also like not a thief, he's honest. And I think she falls in love instantly with the idea of Will as a human, as a man who will respect her and treat her well. And then as she gets to know him more, she realizes like, okay, yeah, it's not just the idea of him, it is really him that I'm in love with. But one of the first things she ever says to him is, "You are for me," or "I am for you, Will Omsford." And I was just like, yes. A woman who knows what she wants. I love Atreya. Later in the book, just because I think this is funny, Will is telling like Atreya like a bunch of information about like why he and Amberly are traveling together, because they hid it at first, because, you know, the whole rovers aren't honest thing. And he like explains this whole convoluted story to Atreya, and Atreya looks at Amberly and goes, "Is this true, Evelyn girl?" And Amberly like nods, and she was like, "Okay, I trust you more." And I just thought that was hilarious that she's like, "I don't trust men, even men that I like." And asked the woman, "Is this true? I believe you over anything that he says." So that's really like fun. The other thing that I really like about this book is this has one of the most devastatingly sad, bittersweet ending to it. And I'm not going to spoil you and tell you what it is, but man, do I bawl my fucking eyes out at the end of this book. And I just adore stories like that. Like, I don't want a happy ending fairy tale. I want devastation and sadness, all of that. So that makes me happy. I gotta switch arms. This is heavy to hold up for this long. The final thing that I want to talk about is the Elfstones of Shannara has been made into a television show. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's Shannara something. And there are things, how do I explain this? I want to kind of talk about like how this differs from like the book to the television show, because before this reread, I had watched the television show much more recently than I had read the book. So I had the events from the show a little bit more freshly in my mind. And the interesting thing is, the show, like the overall plot of the show sticks very, very closely to the overall plot of this book, just the details are different. So without like consuming both of them very close together, you may not realize like, oh, that happened in the television show, not the book. So I want to call out a few of those. One I already talked about, which is Shay is Will's grandfather in the book, and he's his father in the television show. The other thing associated with that is Shay in the television show is like an addict. He's like a magic addict from the Elfstones, and his life after the events of Sword of Shannara are so like devastatingly boring and simplistic that he ends up becoming a drunk and committing suicide. That is not at all present in the book. Shay is still alive. He's an old man, and he's like unwell from old age, but he's not a drunk, he's not depressed, he's not addicted to anything. So that's one of the changes that was made like way more dramatic for the show. Another change that was made more dramatic for the show was Amberly's personality. Amberly in this book is a very, like I said, a very timid girl who is overcoming her own fear. Amberly in the television show is like a hardcore fucking badass who's going to stab you and like, she's athletic, she's one of the boys, not like other girls type thing. And this one, you don't get that in the book. I like Amberly in the book better. Atreya is similar, but not exactly the same, but her personality is very similar. There's also characters in the television show that don't exist in this book specifically. You have, Marith is one of the characters in the television show, and she is, Al-Anon's daughter in the television show. Sorry, that's a spoiler. But Marith doesn't exist in this book. She was like 500 years, or she lived like 500 years before the events of these books, and she was in the first king of Shannara. There's also Cogline, who was also in the first king, or who's also a character in the first king of Shannara, but I think he's a character in later books as well, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, he definitely was not present in this book at all. There is also a character named Bannon who is set to become Al-Anon's apprentice in the television show. And he has a very interesting character arc, and he's a really cool character. He doesn't exist in this book. I think maybe he's in another book later down the line, but I'm not positive enough to guarantee that. Once you get into the second season of the Shannara television show, it has nothing the fuck all to do with this book. It may be partially based on the events of the Wish Song of Shannara, but I won't know for sure until I read that. But I'll let you know in a few seconds for you, but it's going to be a few days before I read that for me. So anyway, best book so far. I'm afraid that this is the only book that I actually ever enjoyed in the Shannara series, and this is like carrying my memory for the whole series, and the rest of it is just gonna suck as much as it has been sucking. So I'm a little skeptical going into Wish Song. Wish Song, I think, follows Will's children, but it could be his grandchildren, because fuck all if I know this shit and I keep messing it up. But we're gonna pretend like it's his children for now, and I'll let you know in a few seconds if I'm wrong. Hello, I just realized this video needs to go live tomorrow, and I haven't recorded my thoughts on the Wish Song of Shannara. So I have this copy. It didn't come with a dust jacket, so I'm gonna go ahead and stick the cover over here so I don't have to hold up a book that you can't see anything about. So the Wish Song of Shannara does follow Will Omsford and Atreya's two children. You have Bryn Omsford and Jair Omsford. Bryn is the elder, and Jair is like the little brother character, right? In the Elfstones of Shannara, because Will is more human than elf, he knew that the Elfstone's magic did something to him, and he was very concerned about how that magic like corrupted his body during the book, but there was never any real answer to like what the magic did to him. Until we get to the Wish Song, and then that's where you find out that it didn't affect him, it affected his children. And both Bryn and Jair have what they call the Wish Song, so they've named it themselves, and they have the ability to sing, and then magic happens, which is why it's called the Wish Song. So both of them have different powers with the Wish Song. Bryn can affect anything living, so she can change anything living. She can tell or sing to a tree and in the spring and tell it that she wants it beautiful fall colors, and then all of the leaves will turn, right? This is traumatic to the tree, but she can do it, and she can do like anything living she can control with her voice, basically, for good or bad. She can heal with it, or she can kill with it. Jair, on the other hand, his gift is illusion. So he can't actually physically affect anything, but he can create any illusion that he wants. So when the evil of the Warlock Lord comes back, and I want to be clear on this, the Warlock Lord has not returned. He was defeated by Shay in the Sword of Shannara, but the evil that created the Warlock Lord is a book called the Ildach. And now the Ildach has created new beings of evil called Mordrace. And the Mordrace are just regular humans that have been corrupted by evil instead of like druids. So they're less powerful than the Warlock Lord, but still evil. And so the goal of this book is Al-Anon shows up and needs somebody to destroy the Ildach once and for all. And obviously because Bryn has the more powerful magic, he recruits Bryn to go on this adventure to destroy the Ildach and leaves Jer at home. But this book asks, what happens when Al-Anon chooses the wrong hero? Because maybe Bryn isn't the right choice of a hero in this, and maybe Jer's magic is more powerful than people think it is. So, overall, this story is not as interesting as the Elfstones of Shannara, but it's better than the Sword of Shannara. He goes back to, I want to say he goes back to plagiarizing both himself and Tolkien again, but that's not necessarily true. He does just steal shit from Tolkien all over again. That's boring, I hate it. It's not as bad as the Sword of Shannara, but he does it again. And he's not plagiarizing himself in this book, but a lot of the tropes that are in this book are found in the prequel books. So because I'm reading these in chronological order, I have just read these tropes in previous books, even though he wrote the books after he wrote this one. So in those books he is stealing shit from this book, but because I read them in the other order, it feels like I'm just rereading the tropes from those books over again. So not a huge fan of that, like, I have no new ideas, so I'm just reusing my old trope thing. But what are you gonna do about it? So, like I said, this is a 3-star. It was fine, but it wasn't special. Like, I'm not gonna remember it going, like, it's even been like a couple of days since I've read this, and I'm already just like, I don't remember a lot of the details. I'm not thrilled with anything, whatever. It's fine. As far as the television show Shannara, the second season of Shannara television show kind of overlaps with this book, but not as much as the first season overlapped with Elfstones. So the basic generic plot of this book is that the Mordrace exist, the Ildach exist, and that they are poisoning the Silver River, right? But in the television show, this still follows like Will and Atreya and like some other characters who don't even ever exist in any of those books. And then this book like follows their children. So you have that big difference there. Also, the location of the like mouth of the Silver River is in a completely different location in the book than it is in the television show. In the television show it's in Ley, which is like a human city, and you have like a bunch of like princes of Ley that you'll see pop up all throughout these books, because usually the Omsfords are friends with somebody from Ley. There's a prince of Ley in this book. In the television show you have a princess of Ley, and she doesn't exist at all in the books. Also, the, like, mouth of the Silver River is not in Ley. The Silver River isn't anywhere near Ley, actually. We can see this right here. Ley is right here, and then the Silver River is, like, over here, right? So not, there's no Silver River down here. The reason that they probably did that in the book is because the Silver River is in dwarven territory, and the CGI to create dwarfs is probably a lot more expensive than they could afford for the television series, so they just put it in a human city instead of a dwarven city. So that's it. But right here you have Cullhaven. If you can see this, Cullhaven is the dwarven city in the Eastland. then it goes over here, and this is Cullhaven, or like a little bit more of a zoomed in map that goes more into the Eastland, and then the Silver River flows all the way up here, where this is the mouth of the Silver River. And so it's well deep into the Eastland instead of in the Southland. So that's a little bit of a change. The other big change in the book is how they deal with the Ildach. In the television show, or both in the book and the television show, one of the good guy hero people is corrupted by the Ildach, and like it controls their mind. In the book, it is Bryn, and then her brother Jer has to save her. In the television show, it's Alanon, and then his daughter Marith has to save him. But keep in mind that Marith in the book is not actually Alanon's daughter. Marith is older than Alanon. She was one of the last druids who existed in Brennan's time. So that's basically my thoughts on this. I'm still not like super excited to continue reading Shannara. It's horrible to okay instead of being like okay to good. So yeah, I will see you next month for Dritz instead of Shannara, or if you're looking for Shannara, catch me in June. If you're interested in doing a read along with me, I will be doing, what is the name of this series? The Heritage of Shannara is the next series. I will be reading that. It's a 4-book series. I will be reading that in June. So subscribe if you were interested in seeing that, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.